Deep in the Yellowstone wilderness, where towering pines meet rugged mountains, lives a wildlife conservationist named Daniel Morgan. For over 20 years, Daniel has dedicated his life to protecting the creatures that call these woods home. His weathered face tells the story of countless days spent tracking, observing, and rescuing animals in distress. Among the park rangers and local conservation teams, Daniel is something of a living legend, not just for his expertise, but for his extraordinary connection with wildlife. I first heard about Daniel's remarkable story from his colleague Emma, who couldn't stop talking about what happened at his wedding. But to understand why it was so incredible, we need to go back 3 years earlier. It was an unusually harsh winter. Snow had fallen heavily for weeks, and temperatures dropped to record lows. Daniel was on one of his regular patrols when he spotted unusual tracks leading into a ravine. Following them cautiously, he discovered a young male grizzly bear trapped under a fallen tree. The bear was severely injured, malnourished, and clearly dying. Most people would have called for backup, or even considered putting the suffering animal down. But Daniel saw something in the bear's eyes, a will to live that matched his own stubborn nature. Against all protocols and common sense, Daniel spent hours carefully freeing the bear. He named him Bruno. That bear was fighting so hard to stay alive, Daniel told me later. I couldn't just walk away. For weeks afterward, Daniel returned to that same spot, bringing food and checking on Bruno's recovery. Wildlife experts warned him about the dangers of habituating a wild bear to human presence. But Daniel insisted he was just helping the bear regain strength before it could fend for itself again. As Bruno recovered, Daniel maintained a respectful distance, but their bond was undeniable. The bear would often sit and watch Daniel from afar, neither threatening nor afraid. Park officials were stunned by the unusual behavior, documenting the interaction for research purposes. Eventually, Bruno disappeared back into the wilderness. Daniel assumed the bear had returned to its natural life, and while he occasionally spotted a large male grizzly in the distance during his patrols, direct contact had ended. Life moved on, and Daniel continued his conservation work. 2 years after rescuing Bruno, something wonderful happened in Daniel's personal life. He fell in love with Catherine, a wildlife photographer who had come to document the park's recovery efforts after a devastating forest fire. Their shared passion for nature created an immediate connection, and within a year, they were planning their wedding. They chose a beautiful clearing near a lake for their ceremony, a special spot where they had often watched sunsets together. It was remote enough to feel intimate, but accessible enough for their small group of guests. The wedding was set for early June, when wildflowers would carpet the meadows. The day arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Wooden benches were arranged in rows facing the lake, with an arch of twisted branches marking the spot where Daniel and Catherine would exchange vows. About 50 guests had made the journey, mostly fellow conservationists, park rangers, and close family members. As Catherine walked toward Daniel in her simple white dress, guests noticed something moving at the edge of the forest. At first, people thought it was just the wind rustling the underbrush. Then gasps rippled through the gathering as a massive grizzly bear emerged from the trees. Emma, who was serving as Catherine's maid of honor, froze mid-step. I thought we were all going to die, she admitted later. A grizzly at a wedding? It was terrifying. Panic spread quickly. Guests scrambled from their seats, some running toward their vehicles, while others stood paralyzed with fear. The officiant dropped his book and backed away slowly. Catherine's father moved to protect his daughter, but Daniel raised his hand, signaling everyone to stay calm. Because Daniel recognized the bear immediately, it was Bruno. The massive grizzly stood at the forest edge, watching the commotion with what almost looked like curiosity. Daniel, ignoring the frantic whispers of his best man to get to safety, took a step toward the bear. Daniel, don't, Catherine called out, her wedding dress forgotten, as fear for her future husband overwhelmed her. But Daniel kept walking, slowly and confidently, toward Bruno. The bear remained still, his eyes fixed on Daniel. When they were about 30 feet apart, Daniel stopped. For what seemed like an eternity, man and bear regarded each other in silence. Then something remarkable happened. Bruno lowered his massive head in what looked astonishingly like a bow. He stayed that way for several seconds, before raising his head again. The gesture was so deliberate, so unlike typical bear behavior, that even the wildlife biologists present were stunned. In 25 years studying grizzlies, I've never seen anything like it.
Dr. Marcus Jennings, a wildlife biologist attending the wedding, told me later.
That bear was acknowledging Daniel. There's no other explanation that makes scientific sense. After this extraordinary moment, Bruno turned and ambled back into the forest, disappearing as suddenly as he had appeared. The entire encounter lasted less than 2 minutes, but it left everyone speechless. When the bear was gone, the wedding guests slowly returned to their seats, murmuring in disbelief about what they'd witnessed. Daniel walked back to the altar, took Catherine's trembling hands in his, and whispered something that made her laugh through her tears. The ceremony continued, though no one was quite able to focus on the traditional aspects of the wedding. How could they, after seeing a wild grizzly bear seemingly give his blessing to the union? During the reception, which was held at a nearby lodge for safety reasons, guests couldn't stop talking about Bruno's appearance. Some called it a miracle, others a bizarre coincidence. The more scientifically minded guests debated whether the bear had actually recognized Daniel or if some other factor had influenced its behavior. Daniel himself was quiet about the encounter, smiling mysteriously whenever asked directly about it. But later that evening, as the celebration wound down, he confided in Emma. Bruno came to say thank you, he said simply, and maybe to check out Catherine. The story might have ended there, an unusual wedding tale to be recounted at family gatherings. But what happened next made it truly extraordinary. The day after the wedding, as Daniel and Catherine prepared to leave for their honeymoon, a park ranger called with urgent news. A motion-activated wildlife camera had captured something incredible. Bruno had returned to the wedding site overnight and left something at the exact spot where Daniel and Catherine had exchanged vows. Curious and a bit concerned, the newlyweds postponed their departure to investigate. When they arrived at the clearing with the ranger, they found a freshly caught salmon placed carefully on a bed of green leaves. Bears don't do this, the ranger kept saying. They don't bring food and leave it. They just don't. Yet, there it was, unmistakable evidence on the camera footage showing Bruno deliberately placing the fish at the site before disappearing back into the forest. Wildlife experts, who later reviewed the footage, were divided in their interpretations. Some insisted it must be a coincidence. Perhaps the bear had been disturbed while eating and abandoned its meal. Others suggested the bear might have been conditioned somehow, during its recovery, to associate Daniel with food. But those who were at the wedding, who saw the bear's deliberate movements and the careful way it placed the fish, believed something far more meaningful had occurred. Bruno had brought a wedding gift. In the months that followed, Bruno was occasionally spotted in the area, always keeping his distance but seemingly watching over the territory where Daniel worked. Park officials, initially concerned about a habituated bear, came to accept Bruno's unusual behavior as he never approached humans or showed any aggression. Daniel and Catherine eventually built a small cabin near the lake, where they continue their conservation work together. They never feed Bruno or encourage him to approach, respecting his wild nature. But sometimes, in the early morning light, they spot him watching from the tree line, a silent guardian, acknowledging the man who once saved his life. Scientists may debate the meaning behind Bruno's actions, questioning whether animals are capable of gratitude or understanding human rituals like weddings. But for those who witnessed the bear's appearance that day, no explanation is needed. Some connections transcend species. Daniel told me the last time we spoke, Bruno and I understand each other. Sometimes that's all that matters. The story of Bruno and Daniel reminds us that the natural world is full of mysteries we have yet to understand. It challenges our assumptions about animal consciousness and the potential depth of bonds that can form between species. And perhaps most importantly, it offers hope that kindness, even in the most unlikely, 90, can return to us in ways we never imagined. As I left Daniel and Catherine's cabin after interviewing them for this story, I glanced back and could have sworn I saw a large shape moving through the distant trees. Maybe it was just my imagination. Or maybe it was Bruno, still watching over the human who had once saved him, continuing a remarkable friendship that defies explanation.
Across the fence where roses sprout, I hear the whispers talked about the greener fields and sunlit always shine. The grass is always greener, greener. The grass is always greener, greener on the other side. Maybe here under the dirt, amongst the heartache and the hurt,